Mia Powell, Jeff Williams, Miriam Terrace, Aileen Laurie and Marty Grenfell and Malcolm Campbell. I'll move those apologies be sustained. Mr Weber, second. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. Acceptance of any late items. Any late items anybody would like to put on the agenda? If not, we'll move on. Thank you. Agenda items. First one on here is the minutes of the last Mayoral Forum have been attached, which was on Friday the 12th of June. I'll move they be a true and correct record of that meeting. So the seconder, thank you, Mayor Turner. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Any matters arising out of those minutes anybody would like to raise? Appears not. Don't be shy, people. There will be an item at the end of the agenda that if you've got any thoughts during the currency of this meeting that we can probably deal with anyway. We won't be too formal. So the first presentation here is under your agenda is 5.1. So it's my pleasure to welcome Heidi Litchfield. This is not the first time you've been to these sort of forums, Heidi, and Zane Jensen of Sport Bay of Plenty, and you've got a presentation to us. All is yours.
Kia ora. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to come to this beautiful view. I imagine it must be hard to concentrate sometimes. Yes, thank you. I'm Heidi Litchfield, Chief Executive of Sport Bay of Plenty, and I'm accompanied by Zane Jensen, who is our Regional Facilities Lead for the Bay of Plenty. We just wanted to give you a brief overview of the Regional Spaces and Places Strategy for 2020 to 2023. We haven't got many slides because we know you've got a big day, and so we're just going to stick with the kind of the high-level summary of what this strategy means for you, and then of course answer any questions. Does that sound okay? Excellent. All right, so it is a Bay of Plenty Spaces and Places strategy, which is exciting because it provides a high-level strategic framework for sport and recreation spaces and places planning in the region. It provides a consistent regional network approach, and it obviously then, hopefully, avoids duplication and promotes best practice in facility development. The strategy has identified and determined local and regional priorities. So there's some regional ones, obviously, and then some local ones that are specific to each area. It also provides quite a clear and robust guide for decision making for sport and recreation spaces and places in the Bay of Plenty. We are obviously part of the approach that has a national direction, so that there are spaces and places strategies around New Zealand, but this one is specific to Bay of Plenty, obviously, and some regions in the country have not been, humbly, quite as successful as the one in the Bay of Plenty. We're very fortunate that you and your teams are used to working together and have quite a collaborative approach. There are other parts of the country where it hasn't been able to get quite as much traction due to a slightly more competitive nature. So we are very thankful to you and your senior leaders who help steer this, that there is this open-minded approach to it being fairly collaborative across the region, and that there's a level of trust where key issues can be discussed, but there's still that commitment to working together. Thanks, Dane, pressing the button there for me. So just a little bit of background. This is the second strategy, or the review. We had the first iteration of the strategy that started in 2017. It took about 2 years to get to that point because obviously there was a lot to be done. There was a lot to be discussed, a lot of key items to get on the table, and then the stock take of what we already had in the region needed to be completed. So it's the concept has been around for around 5 years now, and then the strategy has been in place for the past 3. And it has commitment from the 6 territorial authorities, a watching brief from Regional Council. Sport New Zealand nationally has a buy-in and are very complimentary about the strategy in the Bay of Plenty. And Sport Bay of Plenty, we have all adopted the strategy. It is also well supported by the local community, national and regional sports, and regional local communities generally. Of course, it's not perfect, but it has some general good buy-in. I'll let Zane talk to these bits because he knows them better than I.
Kia ora everyone. So just in terms of our 2017 to 2020, I just wanted to talk to, I guess, what we've been successful in achieving with the approach. So the strategy's been actively involved in over 30 projects, and that's at various levels. So that's right through to developments and actually physical builds or resurfacing, etc. Right back to advising at a kind of needs assessment feasibility level. So within the last 3 years, we've been involved with, like I say, over 30. Because of that, we've managed to leverage over $10 million into community facility planning and development. So not necessarily, again, all infrastructure builds, but sometimes investment into planning and like I say, the needs assessments and the options analysis that have been done as well. Like Heidi said, we're seen to be, I guess, leading the way in this initiative in terms of the region and the approach, and that's due to, the success of the collaborative approach we have across all the councils. The steering group obviously has a representative from each council that sits on board, and we come together quarterly, and it's actually been a little bit more frequent through the review process, but because of that and because of that approach, we've been very successful, and like I say, we're seen nationally to be kind of leading the way as a region with this. In terms of the community funder support, they're on board in terms of where we're heading with projects and the overall approach and the kind of underlying, I guess, principles and foundations within the strategy in terms of, if we're talking, say, indoor facilities, we're talking multi-use, we're talking coexisting, that kind of approach, things like that. Because of that and because of those principles of the strategy, the funders are really supporting us and supporting the community with their projects. And again, the regional cross-boundary conversations, that's been a success that we've seen grow through the last 3 years. In terms of where projects have a regional status or even a sub-regional, we're really seeing a stronger connection between TAs then around those conversations around those facilities. In terms of actually some of the, like I say, the physical works that we've managed to achieve, in the top left there, you see the Rotorua Netball Centre. So that's now been resurfaced with a new rebound ACE surface. So it's a lot safer for all the participants to play on, rather than the asphalt that was starting to crumble away. We got the Tauranga Athletics track resurfaced back in 2017. That was one of the first projects ticked off the list. So that's a regional facility that caters for athletics at a regional level. The lights and resurfacing at Harbourside Netball there, that's increased the capacity of that facility. Down to the bottom right there, the third turf at Blake Park, and that was officially opened on Saturday. That project there has been in the pipeline for about 10 years, to be fair, and since the strategy come on board, it was able to really progress it and speed it up. So it's great to be able to get some facilities like that have been, I guess, bubbling away for quite a while to then gain some traction through the approach. And then in the middle there, each one is kind of representative of some of the planning work that we're doing, and a lot of the feasibility and needs assessment stuff that we're now getting the community aware of. It's all good and well, and no doubt you all would have experienced it at some point. There's always the real passionate sport and recreation community that think that they need, the greatest whiz-bang Tiddlywinks stadium to be built, and don't get me wrong, that's driven by passion, and we don't want to take that passion away. I guess what the strategy does is it comes alongside that passion and it takes them through the right direction, the needs assessment, the feasibility, what does a business case look like? That's the kind of work that the strategy does. And in the bottom left there, we have the Bay of Plenty gym sports facility network plan. Now that's, I guess, a more in-depth look at gymnastics facilities in the Bay of Plenty and how does the network look and how do they complement one another. So that approach there was the first, I guess, of a code-specific plan that we'd done in the region. And so you'll see in a minute when I talk to where we're going moving forward, there's a few more of these plans proposed and how we then delve into the code-specific stuff to really work out what's best for the region and make sure everyone gets a fair slice. So where to next? We've nearly got sign-off from each council around our strategies. I've presented this to a few senior executive groups, to a Putiki council last week, I think it was, with a few other councils booked in over the next couple of weeks as well. In terms of the approach, we're continuing in basically no change in terms of the framework that's within the strategy. We find it's working well and the community is working alongside it, so that's a positive. Some minor enhancements, just from learnings that we've come about. And then really, once we've got it signed off, we're into our priority project implementation. That's the bit I'm getting really excited about. Ideally, we would have had the strategy, obviously, signed off, ready to go come 1 July this year. We were tracking well towards that, and then, COVID reared its head, and there we were. But with a full credit to your teams, we've managed to actually progress it really, really well, and again, just adapt and work well through that COVID period and keep the review going. So hats off to all your teams that have been involved with it. Just wanted to talk to the regional priorities. So in the first strategy, we had 12 priority projects. Moving forward, we have 30. So that's a full credit to obviously the work that everyone's doing, and I guess the buy-in from the community as well. But what we have now in this next 3 years is 5 regional priorities. So the first one, develop a Bay of Plenty water sports facility and water access strategy. Again, we don't know where the scope of that starts and stops. That's what the steering group's going to begin to work on. But what we do acknowledge is that as a region, water sports is huge. It's one of our strengths. I guess the facilities that we have when it comes around water sports and the natural resource we have. And we look at an indoor court and we know, there's netball there and there's basketball there and there's volleyball there, and then we look at a rugby field and we go, right, it's a rugby field or that's a football field. But we look at that harbour and what do we think? We need to almost try and start thinking about it in a way where that's actually a sport and recreation facility as it is as well, and almost bring it to the same status in a way. So, again, we could go down many rabbit holes within that project, but that, I guess, starting with designing that scope will be where we sit as a steering group and moving from there. The next is around an opportunities paper, just around how we connect a lot of the cycle and walking tracks across the region. Again, we could go into a lot of depth around that, but I have this crazy vision in my head that the Bay of Plenty could almost be a cycling hub effectively for the country. You could get on your bike in Waihi Beach and spend 6 weeks in the Bay of Plenty, end up riding down through to Tauranga and through to the Rotorua and spending a few weeks on the Redwoods, and then ride out through Kawerau and down the river and out into Whakatane, and then finish up in the Motu Trails, potentially even with the connection right through to Gisborne. So I guess, that's where the thinking's starting to go with that one. Is how do we actually connect a lot of the great work everyone's doing around cycle tracks in each TA district? How do we connect it regionally? And then we've got the 3 facility plans. So the indoor court one, that's going to look at how, when we're developing future indoor courts within the region, how do we best go about being innovative with those and trying to maximise the use out of them and get as much utilisation. And then the squash and the bowls facility plans are similarly like the gymnastics one. So, okay, from a squash perspective, what does squash need from a regional perspective? And how does each club actually factor into the overall network? Similarly with bowls. Two sports there that are heavily facility rich, but actually need a lot of investment to keep those things going. And where's the opportunities for rationalisation, amalgamation, that kind of approach. So those are the 5 regional priorities that we're going to try and achieve. And then when I come around and present to each of the councils, I'll then dive into the TA specific stuff that's been put forward from your staff. Questions?
Yes. Oh, sorry. I've been a bit too casual, sorry. Your regional looks at these, is this for national and international facilities for competitions at national and international standard?
So within the strategy, each existing facility is given a classification, I guess, or a status. And the strategy covers from your local community facility right through to an international. So it covers everything. And if we're looking at facilities, new facilities or new infrastructure, we're trying to, through that needs assessment and feasibility assessment, trying to define what the need is and whether or not, is there a need for an international Tiddlywinks stadium, or are we talking about a local community Tiddlywinks group, and that's worked through within the process.
Yeah, Weber.
Thanks, Heidi and Zane. We have found the original strategy incredibly helpful, particularly the matrix picked up on the previous point. Is it a Tiddlywinks facility for 2 players who want to meet once a month, or is it to hold the international championship? And most of our groups, we've taken it through that and we found it incredibly helpful. Just makes so much sense. But the other point that I think we need to be mindful of, it's a facilities analysis or facilities strategy. One of the things that we're coming in, I think, where we need to think about it, particularly as we go into our LTPs, most of the assets above ground, they're great while you've got passionate people there. But what we're starting to find in our district, and I think it's right throughout the region, nobody's made any depreciation provision in their accounting. And as these buildings reach the end of their use-by date and can't get a building warrant of fitness, what's the next step going forward? And I just wonder whether in the strategy you want some sort of document to remind these organisations that if they're not providing for depreciation and sound financials, what is the long-term future of their facility? Because we've got a lot of them, and falling into that, which is our part of the world, is community halls. We have got them coming out of our ears. Many of them are on the original Cowrie piles we put in there in the 1890s, and people are starting to wonder why the floor is not level and the indoor bowls don't work anymore. So I think that's an issue we've really got to address, because a lot of our aged facilities are going to be expensive to replace.
Definitely concur with that, Mayor Weber, and I guess that's hindsight's a wonderful thing. But within all new facilities, that's the luxury of this approach, is we're now putting in a lot of that work that needs to be done to make sure that the groups know and understand what depreciation actually is. What does the future look like? How do we make these new facilities sustainable effectively? And that's where, we talk about developing new facilities. Sometimes a project I'll work with might be around rationalising and amalgamating rather than building new, purely for that reason. We might have 10 Tiddlywinks stadiums all, within a kilometre region of one another, but hang on, maybe we just need one for those 2 people, that kind of approach.
Just reiterate, that matrix is our 11th commandment.
We're with you in understanding that rationalising can be almost more important than for new, because of the exact reasons you've outlined. And that was one of the biggest issues that arose before the first strategy was written, just how much had not been prepared for, which is, we can't go back, but it was good to actually bring that up to a point that it could be seen. Yeah.
Right, welcome, Mayor Stevie.
Kia ora.
A question.
I do have a question. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for allowing me to come in. I'm at Hell's Gate Tikitere here, and great that the Zoom works. But Zane and Heidi, thank you for your presentation. I think the question for us all is, how do we get above the line again? Our dream and our aspiration for the cycleway linkage with the Ring of Fire cycleway. So I'm glad to hear, Zane, that cycling is on your agenda, cycle and walking tracks, but it's how we're going to connect that way across from Opotiki through to Tongariro. And it was a great aspiration. It never really fired, but we've done a lot of patchwork development of cycleways, and I think it needs a plan to pull it together. But thank you for your work in Sport Bay Plenty.
Do
you facilitate that concept?
Kia ora from Hell's Gate, Mayor Stevie. Sounds like a great place to be. Yes, we're with you that it is obviously it's a challenging issue to connect the cycleways, and one that has been around for a little while, been a tough nut to crack, and the same for walkways. I'm pretty sure Zane can comment because he knows better than I, but I'm pretty sure the strategy suggests that we will facilitate, Sport Bay of Plenty will, along with your team who are the project steering group, facilitate a kind of a high-level paper about how that could happen, identifying the challenges and the opportunities. From our initial work in this revised strategy, it suggests that we're getting close to being able to do that, that the ducks are lining up a little bit more than they might have in the past. I'll let Zane comment because I could be going off. He might want to kick me under the table, but I think we're getting close, Stevie.
Nailed it. No, I think, yeah, exactly what Heidi said. And I think we're really lucky that we have a strong relationship with Sport Katoa as well, who have an equivalent, I guess, of Mayoral over that side of the hill. So when we start talking about cross-boundary stuff, again, across regions, we can really facilitate that with our partners as well. So, yeah, I mean, the sound of that, it really excites me. We can take it even further.
Well, I think with the Future of Tourism Task Force, these concepts, these big concepts, are becoming very critical for New Zealand in the future. And that's one that the link is with right throughout the land, really. So how do we link up all these amazing cycleways so that a visitor or one of our own goes on a 6-week cycle tour?
Mayor Judy.
Thank you. I just want to talk about the multifunction of, particularly in rural communities. I think the history was, we built a badminton court and expected everybody to have their weddings and social events in there, and they didn't really quite come off, and so people started looking around, and so they were actually underutilised what was anticipated, and that almost that sense of design being absolutely fine to have a big sporting opportunity in a facility, but either a smaller offside or an ability to cut a room in half with a sliding door or something that made it more user-friendly for other more social opportunities, and particularly in rural communities where they can't afford to have one of each. They have to make everything work in the same space. And the one thing that had feedback was that often those facilities weren't particularly suited to social occasions, and which had been their original intention, and then they were taken over by a sporting code and lost something. So I think it is, particularly in very rural communities, a facility is fantastic, but it almost needs to cover more than the one base that sometimes it's designed for.
You totally agree, and that's one of the big, I guess, principles of this approach, is that it's all about multifunction, and then when we start a project, around needs and options, what are we trying to achieve, and what does that community need? Yep, they might have 50 tiddlywinks players for all we know, so we need to factor that in, but then we also need to factor in the space for the bridge club or, and whatnot as well. But then the rural community also might need a space to host weddings. So we need to be able to keep all that in mind and try and maximise that facility as much as we can.
One of the interesting things, I visited a marae upgrade the other day, and it is quite significant change they're making to the traditional. They've still got the traditional wharikai and the bits and pieces they've always had, but there's also added additional things in, and they were even thinking of things like civil defence needs. And so it's a very different look and feel to a marae that I've ever been to before, so that they're thinking in that space too. And some of those may end up being well covered by marae, but I think we need to factor that in as well.
Anything else? Otherwise, Heidi and Zane, could I thank you sincerely for your presentation. I was going to say it's great in terms of your strategy, it's great to see the enthusiasm of youth, but I probably should say to see the enthusiasm of Sport Bay of Plenty. It's great. And I think if the last events of the last 6 months, and it's getting a bit longer now, have got a silver lining, it's the fact that in terms of recreation, sport recreation, You've now seen what sort of spend New Zealanders have been chucking towards international travel. You know, in excess of $10 billion a year. And if we can refocus a large or a portion of that spend into recreational activities, whether it's bike trails, integrated bike trails, or whether it's making people healthier, because we've only got to look at the statistics in terms of health outcomes, obesity, and all the challenges for the young people at school. It behoves all of us to really make an effort in terms of supporting, you know, entities like Sport Bay Plenty and sport and recreational activities across the country. So thanks very much. Loved your strategy, and clearly you've been successful in the last 3 years, and we wish you all the best for the next 3 years.
Thank you so much, and once again, thanks for the opportunity to come today. Hope the rest of the meeting goes well.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you.
Right, that gives us, in terms of your agenda, 6.1, which is post-election contact, which is a discussion really that's been introduced by Mayoral.
Thanks, Chair Doug, and the reason it's verbal, it would have been a brave person to write anything about this government before 9 o'clock on last Saturday. And I think I pick up on Doug's point that the world has changed, and we need to just accept that. I have spent from 8 o'clock to 9:15 in an interesting meeting with some iwi leaders and Kāinga Ora. And Kāinga Ora will, by next Tuesday, announce their New Zealand structure, which means we need to, I think, have a long, hard look at ourselves. I think we need to get together sometime soon, pretty quickly, and work out what are the big issues for us, because I believe this government is in a totally different space. And I think, Stevie, you just made the point about cycleways and walkways and the big concepts. When you look at trying to line them up, Waka Kotahi is a significant player in this space, and we need to be joined up with them collectively going forward. Ezra's zooming into this today as well, and I think we need to sit down, and I understand there's going to be ministerial trips through here. We've got to get in front of this government very quickly, because the three waters is going to happen, whether you like it or not. The linking up of cycleways and those sorts of things are going to happen, whether we like it or not. And I think we need to be one of the early cabs off the rank, as we've just heard. We're pretty well recognised because of our places and spaces strategy. We're pretty well recognised with the RMA stuff. When you look at the last 100 pages in the recommendations, if you look at the smart growth structure that we've got and some of the things that have happened in your part of the world, where we are involved at the highest level, we are pretty much aligned, I think, with this new government. And I think there's some incredible opportunities for us to get together with this government before Christmas, if we can, and I don't know who we can get, but basically say, are we in line with them, and what can we do together to make sure that the thought, or more importantly, the money comes to our part of the world, because Auckland think they're in the same boat, Waikato, Wellington, the Canterbury region, but as we know from Waka Kotahi, the bucket is almost empty. So we have to have the best story possible, and we need to convey that and communicate that really, really well to central government to say, hey, we're the place you should do a pilot with. When you look at our collective volume of 300,000 people sometime in the future in the wider Bay of Plenty, we could be a really good pilot for what a lot of the things they're trying to do. I don't want to criticise the paper too early, but what the chief executives are talking about is fine. But this government is in a totally different space. Yeah. And I think we really need to make sure that we're aligned. Because the big bane, if you think you're going to have a regional plan for the Bay of Plenty, by June 1 of next year, you are dreaming. So it's how do we become pilot and set a trend? Because it's going to happen on a coalition of the willing. We're starting to see it in the Three Waters. So how do we get the coalition of the willing in our part of the world so that we can start working with central government? So that's really why I wanted to bring it to the attention of this group, because I think we've got a window of opportunity between now and Christmas where I think this government is going to make some calls, I know in the kind of rural space, and that's going to be quite significant, because I think what TPK have been fiddling around with is going to change a little bit. The whole of government is going to change, and it might be regional offices and those sort of things. How do we get in really quick in front of this government and say, we're here to play with you wherever we can? So that's all I just wanted to raise, how we make it happen and who's going to make it happen. But I'd like to think we do it happen, we make it happen quickly. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Judy.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think there's something we can leverage off and build on that worked really well, which was what happened in the Eastern Mayoral through the Provincial Growth Fund. And it was noted, and as far as we know, we were the only region or sub-region that did what we did. And it was appreciated and valued at the cabinet table, which is where we need to have our credibility. And I think we can extend that. I'm just saying that it was a local regional leadership group was set up. Kerry Tuckarowan helped drive that and establish that and chaired it. The 3 councils and iwi and other applicants who were planning to get some money out of that fund. And then we did it in a way where we supported each other. So we would kind of say, don't play us off against each other. We think a Portuguese application is fabulous. We think Colorau's application is fabulous, and they think ours is. And I remember a discussion with the board where we were walking along the wharf in Whakatane, and the Portuguese muscle barge came in, because we're currently receiving that for them until they get theirs up and running. And this lady said to me, clearly, Portuguese don't need a harbour, if you're coming receiving it. And I said, no. We have other plans for our harbour. We're looking in a completely different direction. They absolutely need this. Plus, that's a Whakatoia project. This is Ngāti Awa, and we defended each other's position, but which was absolutely true. There is a need for both. So I'm just thinking we've kind of got it right there. How do we push that out now and make it an Eastern Bay, a full Bay of Plenty experience? Because I think there's things we can learn from that. And I think you're absolutely correct. I think this is a new day and a new opportunity with this government that, and we're just saying, it worked really well. We were noted for it. And if we want to get ahead of the game, we need to absolutely present ourselves as a united force in terms of anything we're looking to do. I really, really support that.
Thanks, Judy. Mayor Chadwick.
Yeah, well, I'm in a bit of a bind here, to tell you the truth. And Ezra, good morning. And Ezra knows our Rotorua view, which is very strongly about knowing our own proposition locally. And so I worried about the paper that I saw and felt very unsettled. I cannot give the energy to a regional plan without first knowing locally exactly where we're going in partnership with Te Arawa. And then I got even more worried when I got the email about the change of approach to today's meeting, because I want to ask all of you, what is this iwi Leaders Forum? We can't yet be very clear about leadership in Te Arawa. And at the hui that was facilitated regionally, our iwi leaders were not there. So we've got some challenges with our partnership approach locally. And we've got to get that sorted and strong before we come to a regional table. So I like Sport Bay Plenty coming. You can see some opportunities we can work collectively on there. I think there will be local propositions that fold into regional opportunities, and we'd love to then be at that sort of forum to present what might be potentially rolled out in a much wider region, but it's not the Bay of Plenty region for me. So it's mai makatuki tongariro. And for us, it's what do we do along our people pathway in terms of place shaping with iwi as partners, and then what can we bring to a wider table to share regionally. I'm happy to talk to a minister about that. I've talked to Minister Hipkins and said, stop driving us to working only regionally, and you still look at the boundaries of regional Bay of Plenty. And that's not the right boundaries. They should be communities of interest. And we need to have a clear proposition to put to any minister that comes before us that it is localism first. For Judy, it might be her cluster of mayors that have worked with great success. For us, it might be some other propositions, and then a regional forum for where the opportunities might be. But it cannot be driven regionally down. So that's where we stand. We don't retire from that. And I was very concerned about in the letter talking about the iwi chairs. Toby struggles with that. And at the iwi forum that we had was a representative from Te Arawa Lakes Trust. That's not an iwi leader. So that coming back that it's already given and it's in place and it's done and dusted is quite wrong. And we'll get off to the wrong footing if we say we've got the big tick from the iwi leaders of our region. And that's really a challenge for us there. So it's a construct, I know, that's called matariki, but be careful what you ask for. With that regional fund that has been proposed by Labor, and they call it a regional fund, it's only 200 million, the last thing that I will accept locally is that we have to put it through a regional lens to get a tick. Because in the past for us, that failed for us, quite frankly. And in the past, we only got very small crumbs. And so it has to be a different approach. And for me, it's about local leadership. So I struggled with the paper, but I get there's a grain there of what we can pull together. Yeah, you want to meet a minister? I don't want to meet a minister that says you must work regionally, and to hell with the localism aspect, because that's not where we're at. So I suppose you're not surprised hearing that. And I'll come to any regional table when we need to get regional agreement around a proposition. That's where we're at.
Right, thank you, Stevie. Well, one thing is that you're consistent, but you've actually traversed into the following agenda item, which is 6.3.
Yes.
So thanks for making those comments about that without the benefit of hearing the Chief Executive's position. But I just want to come back to what Mayor Webber was talking about was the appetite around this table to at least engage with ministers and have a discussion amongst the mayors in terms of the appetite to actually take a position and say, what is the Crown's aspirations, what's the direction of travel they want to take, and our role within it. So that's all he wanted to do in terms of that, rather than get into some dialogue at the moment in terms of agenda item 6.3.
But we've got to be
Webber.
I agree, but we've got to be clear. If you invite ministers, it's not just to say we're all holding hands on everything. We've got to be. Yeah.
No, sorry, Steve, that's not what I said. In fact, the opposite was what I was trying to say, is that what has happened in the East over the last 2 or 3 years has worked incredibly well.
Yep.
What you have done in Rotorua has worked incredibly well. But, you know, and I evidenced the Ngāti Whakāui development that's going. when you look at what some of the things we've done in smart growth, I think we've done pretty well. It's how do we take those stories to a group of ministers to say, you know, it's working pretty well here and it's broken. We don't need to restart. I'm not talking about regions. I'm talking about how we as three pretty well organised groups go and tell our real good stories, because I think what we've done in the last 3 years, we've had some incredible wins. And a lot of them have been working with central government. And it's really reinforcing that we want to continue that, because, no disrespect, we have had a bucket load. You know, Western Bay's had $1.2 billion. So we're pretty chuffed with that. We don't want to lose connection to that Pūtea bucket. And so how do we show that we are still cooperating with them? We're really trying to help them where they're going, and what can we do to continue it? I'm agreeing, I don't think we're ready to go to regionalisation. That's the big bang theory, and I don't think we're ready for that yet. But we've got 3 waters coming up the lift. We've got some significant changes in the RMA coming up. How do we go and tell, you know, this has worked for us because we've collaborated this way in the east. Rotorua have done their thing, we've collaborated in the west, and it's been successful for central government as well as local government. And you look at the Ngāti Whakaui initiative you've got going, I'd love to have 5 of those in our part of the world. And how do we learn from you and central government to fast track that? Because I think what you're going to see coming out of the housing space from Kainga Ora in particular, an incredible ramping up of speed in building houses in our districts. And it could well be our district plan is the thing that's holding everything back. How do we fast track them?
I get
a sub-regional approach to the regional approach.
So thanks, Gary. My only commentary, and I think where Gary was coming from, is essentially when you look at the macroeconomic environment we're going into, that tree that's been blossoming and dropping its petals of money at the bottom of the garden is going to cease to flower.
That's right.
This country cannot continue with the borrowing levels that it has taken on board and continue to increase them. Because at some stage, the money's got to be paid back. So that money tree, at some stage, will cease to flower in the way that it has in the last 12 months. That's just economic logic. So I think what Gary's saying is, how as a region can we think about that? Because as you know, Stevie, whether it's the 3 waters or it's other initiatives from local government in terms of expectation and other parts of the community, those are the issues that we're going to have to focus on in terms of how do we operate with the Crown in terms of the way forward from that. So do I have any others in terms of the appetite or the initiative to actually engage at some level with the government of the day at the appropriate time in terms of finding out what their expectation is? We're all a bit quiet.
Chair. David here from Taupo. Absolutely be happy to be involved. It's common courtesy. New government comes in, even though it's no change in administration, common courtesy to meet and greet and tell them continue on those aspirations that we have. So absolutely.
Thanks, David. Stevie?
Of course. I just think we've got to be careful of the message. Actually, I'm not worried about the Pūtea. I'm more worried about how we're going to address inequality, crime, homelessness. It's those issues that can only be sorted locally. But yes, of course I'd be there. You know I'd be there with bells on.
You'd be at the front of the queue, Stevie.
Eh?
You'd be at the front of the queue.
No, look, seriously, do you know what they're going through at the moment? They're forming a cabinet. Then new ministers are going to get into clusters. Do you know who the Minister of DIA is? We don't. So, yes, we'd love to meet, but it's nearly the end of October. But I think the offer to meet is fine. I think that's right. I agree with David. It's common courtesy that we'd like to extend hospitality. and sit around and have a real conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Stevie. And look, the points you raised are material. So as long as you've probably been in local government in your mayoral position, and when you had your minister's position, the issues about inequality, poverty, despite all the attempts and all the money that's been chucked at it, I don't think they're getting any better. If anything, they're getting worse. You look at the increase in terms of valuations of housing and the hurdle for young people and other people to get into some form of ownership themselves is not getting easier despite all the interventions that have taken. That's a fundamental issue that you have been on about, and I think we all need to, as authorities and as a region, to probably try and get our heads around. And I think that's probably part of the initiative that Ezra and the Chief Executive has been trying to scope in terms of the work that they've been doing. Right, anything else from any of our Zoom colleagues? Appears not. So, the way forward. Fiona, can we take that on board, and it might dovetail into item 6.3 in terms of the way forward with that?
Yes, good morning. I think all of these agenda items are actually very much linked. So perhaps if we go through them all and then you come back in terms of determining your next steps.
Right, that leads us to a BIM, briefing incoming ministers. Judy, you're going to speak to this?
Yes, all I was wanting us to do, it flows on completely from what Gary's just said. I think that if looking at what they campaigned on and some of the messaging that we've seen from Labor, I think that, and the government, is that there's some of the things they want to achieve are things that they'll achieve with us. They're quite localised in their application. So it's not just the 2 or 3 waters, whichever ends up there. I think there's a number of other things around housing and things that they're going to have that they're going to rely on local knowledge. So I don't think our relationship with them is going to be just limited to the 2 waters. So it did occur to me that it would be a good idea for us at some point at an appropriate time, but as soon as is possible, maybe it's once Cabinet's announced, is that we do try and be strategically talking to some ministers about. And I think the other thing that I would personally like in that is so understanding, one, the challenges that we're coming out of, and in these it includes Whakaari, the things like the timeframes around some of the funding opportunities have been very tight and put us under a lot of pressure and put our relationships under a lot of pressure with iwi and the likes to get them across the line. And just understanding those challenges and how we're managing them locally, I think those types of understandings between us and central government are going to be really important going forward. Our capacity to deliver has been a big challenge. We're just undergoing a substantial reorganisation because we don't have the bandwidth to deliver everything, and we needed to do some restructuring, some courage on this lady's part to make some hard calls. So I just think that their need to work with us and our need to have them at the table is important, and whether we just start that conversation. It doesn't have to be, a detailed thing, but just that beginning of that conversation, I think, would be good as soon as is wise and possible to do so, is really what I'm saying. Would you want to add to that?
I was thinking that there was interest. Thanks, Judy, and good morning, everybody. Apologies for being late, Mr. Chair. I've just got off a plane. And I just got out of Wellington Airport in time. Apparently there was a fire there and they had to evacuate the whole airport. So just following up on what me Judy's saying is, we wondered whether there was merit in perhaps a regional, everyone will do their own ministerial incoming briefings, but whether there was just one reflecting on the things that we have worked on together as a region and our aspiration to engage constructively and just to kind of a high level. Mayor Chadwick, I take your point about the ministers might be working in clusters. So what is it that they want to know about the region at that level as they start to engage across the country and, getting our foot out of the starting box pretty quickly and just giving them an overview of where we're at, some of the the opportunities and challenges. That's kind of what we'd be wondering whether there was value in that.
Which might be a precursor to the conversation.
Yeah, it's a precursor to the conversation we're about to have.
Exactly.
Regional leadership. Mayor Weber.
Yes, the two almost mirror images of each other. And for those who are not aware, the Smart Growth Agreement, which has been signed through Cabinet now, has the Minister of Local Government, the Minister of Housing, and the Minister of Transport sitting on it. Now, we understand they're coming through our part of the world between now and Christmas to have the first meeting. And that may be an opportunity for us to sit. As I said, you didn't hear, Stevie, I've just been in a meeting with some Kainora people. And
Yeah,
Israel. Hopefully I'm not breaking any confidences here. And some iwi leaders. The Ngāti Whakāui initiative in Rotorua is an incredible one. And when you look how that is between central government, iwi, and local government, and is, I think, 1,500 hectares, isn't it, Stevie? You know, that's a significant initiative. You know, our 40 houses on 10 hectares in Katikati doesn't look all that big, but the principle's the same. How do we work? Because I understand Kainora has got a change in the way they can borrow, and they're looking at a significant investment in housing. Why don't we, I agree with you completely. How do we brief the ministers to say, hey, and picking up on your point, Stevie, the housing problem throughout the Bay of Plenty is common.
Yeah.
How do we get those houses built? A lot of it will involve iwi, and I'm with your point that my concern about the Maori Forum in this Bay of Plenty area, I don't think even Maoridom know who the grouping is. And so I think that's an issue we need to discuss with central government. We can't resolve that in the Bay of Plenty, but we need to say, how are they looking to do it? When they come in these big Kainora initiatives, what do we need to do? Because this is where I think it loops back onto the RMA. We are going to have to alter our district plans to enable a lot of these developments because they're in rural areas. If you're looking at Papakainga, linked to Marae, they are generally in rural areas where most of our district plans say you can't do it. So, you know, how do we work with central government to tidy up? Because those are where some of the large blocks of land are that can be developed. You know, no disrespect to Tauranga City, but you've got 1,500 hectares of green space in the city to develop 30,000 houses. So, you know, we need to be pragmatic, and I agree with you, Judy. So we're in the same space, similar. I think we need to do it before Christmas. Stevie's correct. Let them work out who's going to wear which hat. But once we know who's got which hat, how can we get some of them up here? And as I made the point, it could well be that we use that opportunity of those three ministers who are sitting on Spark Road. They come here and we ask them to stay the night. We collectively meet with them after the Spark Road meeting. Or if there's another initiative happening in our part of the world, how do we tack on the front end and the back end of that? Because it's an opportunity. Rest assured, every other territorial authority in New Zealand will be having this conversation as well. And I think we're better joined up. I know in the Waikato, I know in Canterbury, we're a lot better aligned than they are. So there's an opportunity, and I think we just got to grab it. So we must have been looking at the same mirror when we were asked to put agenda items together.
Gary, which were the ministers again that are on Smart Growth?
Local government, transport and housing.
Right.
So that's probably a good segue into the next agenda item before we get to a definitive position. And as Gary said, the Smart Growth Initiative here, which has been adopted by the government, is not and cannot be seen in isolation of just the Western Bay thing. There is a range of interdependencies in terms of the success of that smart growth that go right throughout the region and extend beyond the region. So that's the considerations that have gone into this. So we shouldn't sit in our little silos and think, oh, it doesn't affect me, because ultimately the Smart Growth Initiative is trying to capture whether it's the logistics movements, you know, from Auckland through to Tauranga here, or whether it's trees and kiwi fruit from the Eastern Bay, plenty, and Rotorua, rail freight. It's trying to capture the whole lot. So we have to look at it holistically and understand that there's interdependencies within this. Hence, lead into the next topic, which I understand Russell's going to introduce for us.
Right. Yeah, thanks. I take on board all the things that have been said, and I think we're all trying to achieve the same thing, so it might be by different methods and that. But if we could just go through this paper first. So Fiona did send an email out yesterday to set the context for the piece of work. And I just want to talk about, so there's been a couple of comments made about that 1 to 4 on the second page, because I think there's been some misunderstanding.
Yes, thank you. So I did send an email yesterday just saying that we were looking across New Zealand in terms of what other regions are doing. And in that email, I talked about 4 other regions and what they were doing in terms of the linkages between the Mayoral Forum and iwi chairs. We are getting more information, so at your next Mayoral Forum, we can tell you in terms of all of the regions in New Zealand. So the 4 points related to 4 regions in New Zealand. And also in terms of the iwi forums that Mayor Chadwick referred to that have happened in our region. So the Regional Council has sought to bring iwi chairs together to understand really in terms of how we can improve how we work as a Regional Council. That first iwi chairs meeting was chaired by Toby Curtis, Tawera Gardner, and to Mark Solomon. So we had 2 sirs at the top table in this room, and we had over 50 iwi representatives here. They decided that it was worth having further discussion, and so we've had a further one which was actually on Zoom because we were in level 2, and that really focused on COVID and the response to COVID recovery. And it was an opportunity for different iwi across the region to show how they had responded to COVID and the leadership that they showed. It was absolutely remarkable in terms of seeing how Whanaapanui responded, Te Aroa responded, and Ngaitarangi with the different parts of the region. There's a further regional iwi chairs hui next week, and that is for regional iwi chairs to talk about fresh water. So that one, there will be representatives from Kuhui Waimari, which is an advisory group to Minister Parker, and also Professor Skelton coming to talk about the freshwater initiatives. So it is apparent from the regional iwi forums that there are topics, strategic issues for the region where iwi chairs want to come together and discuss. That in no way at all takes from the local relationships with iwi chairs that territorial local authorities have and must have in terms of our current environment. So when we've talked about a regional iwi forum in this document, it's about referring to those 2 hui that have happened to help the Regional Council understand how we can better engage.
So if I can just give a bit of background, so the Cs had done this piece of work, so it was really around that there was a number of changes happening in local government and started to have discussions around what the future of local government might be, and then the Three Waters and the RMA changes that are coming along really made that a little bit more urgent, because these have the potential to significantly change the makeup of local government, which in the past we've just evolved. And so I think in the first page of Fiona's email, it talks around the things that we were looking at the workshop, which was thinking into the future. What are the anticipated or enduring needs of the opportunities for the Whakapita communities? And what do we think is the best contribution of local government agencies to respond to meet these needs and opportunities? So we had a workshop with Anne Patello facilitating. Now, unfortunately, just given the timing and everything else that's on, there were a limited number of people there, but we had 3 CEs there, and Ezra and Dominic were there as well. So it was around looking at, started off as what is it that local government does well compared to other people in that, and It's really around that stuff around that local authorities know their communities. It's something that central government struggle a bit with. It's around we know our places, and if you look at communities, councils are really the only elected body there of representatives. And so if central government wanting to engage with people, they're the ones that they're going to engage with. And again, it's around the local having those relationships with their communities, with their iwi. And so that was where we got to in terms of thinking what it is that local government do. So in terms of the functions going forward, that's, if you take out the three waters and some of the infrastructure stuff and that, it's around the placemaking stuff. And it's around the delivering on the 4 well-beings. So that really the question comes back to how can we be, as local authorities, more effective in influencing central government policy and central government thinking around those things.
And just moving through the report, the relationship with central government, as the mayors have talked about, is very strong in our region. There is a very good relationship with central government, and it's apparent across the region. We're very privileged that the likes of Ezra is so there for our region, and he comes to many Huia meetings. He's attended the Mayoral Forum for a number of months. He is the nominated lead from the public service and works extremely well with officials, with all of us in terms of seeking to address issues that local communities raise. And we saw that the strength in terms of the linkage between mayoral forums and central government and iwi chairs was a real opportunity for you to consider. Ezra, do you want to say anything about the relationship with central government?
Sure, thanks Fiona, and thank you Chair for the opportunity. I just really want to pick up 2 points, pick up from Mayor Gary's earlier comments as well, and absolutely endorse and echo the opportunity. I think very wise whanau Pinui Sage Rikirangi Gage described it as the mana to mana, mahi to mahi. And I think the opportunity to have a mana to mana engagement with the mayoral, particularly the mayoral forum, mayors, with ministers, I think is really critical. I mean, our role essentially as central government is to enable, to support local communities. And so, but the opportunity to have a mana to mana engagement to set the scene, I think is something that I think that the certainly ministers and certainly central government, and I do think there is that window of opportunity before things form. Picking up from Mayor Stevie's comments as well, and absolutely agree with you, Mayor Steve, is that the success can only be achieved locally. And so the opportunity to have an approach to supporting, to have that mana to mana engagement, but also to ensure that the mahi to mahi also gets done. And that's probably our role as central government agencies, regardless of whether it be housing, MSD, education, and so forth. I do want to acknowledge, though, that there's a lot that we can do better as central government, and had the pleasure recently, or had the privilege really of sitting with Aileen and some of her team down in Opotiki to better understand what we could do better at a local level as well. And so while we do have quite a significant footprint as central government agencies and public servants across this region, I guess the opportunity to, as Fiona has mentioned, for us to work better together to connect, to provide that cohesion, because our folks can only go so far. But one of the opportunities I see in the power is that local government and local communities have far better access, and certainly iwi do, into how we can transform the lives of those people that Doug talked about, the inequity, the poverty, the housing issues. But that can only be achieved if we're working alongside in true partnership with our local government colleagues to support and enable that to happen as well. So yeah, I think the opportunity to establish that mana to mana and to work at a mahi to mahi level, I think is really critical. Just for one final point as well, Fiona, probably to share with you, in the spirit of being really free and frank and open, is that one of the one of the conversations that we're having as central government agencies, particularly with my equivalent across the other regional leads, is, ways that we could be a lot more connected. I think there's an assumption that if you're in education and health, that we know exactly what each other are doing. And so what the last few months have really taught us in COVID is that we are better when we're connected and working together. That's not to replicate or duplicate what others are doing. So that's a piece of work that we're engaged with as central government agencies, and that's really one of our biggest focuses for this side of the year, as we await the new government to really start to outline their priorities. That's me, Fiona. Thank you.
Thank you, Ezra. And so just carrying on a little bit more, so the what is proposed is 6 monthly basis for the forum, which would meet to plan development for the region, identify and agree local contribution to national programs, and shape national policy priorities based on local community needs. And at the workshop, it was very evident in terms of only local government really knows local community needs, and that is the strength of local government. And then just moving on before Steph finishes up, and this is the how. So what the proposal is to for you to take back to your councils and give some thought to, and also to ask iwi leaders if they're of the view that this would bring benefit to the region, is to establish a regional leadership forum, which is that green circle in the middle, to bring all the leaders of the region together, and for that to meet 6 monthly, so potentially to move from 4 mayoral forums to 2 mayoral forums and 2 regional leadership forums, building on what is done locally, and being that key cog in terms of representing iwi, community, local government with ministers. And some of the topics, for example, that you might consider and have discussion and engagement with ministers from a regional council perspective would be things like climate change. So how does the region activate and address climate change issues? Safety and resilience, that's another key issue for the regional council in terms of ensuring that our communities maintain safety and resistance. And of course, you already come together in terms of roading infrastructure and transport infrastructure in that space. Over to you, Steph.
Just to endorse what my colleagues have said, really that the conversations, I think, around all of this will take place in multiple positions, in multiple places, whether it's the LGNZ board, whether it's Solgum, and I guess we're just incumbent on us as we're thinking about our organisations for the next 10 years under the LTP process about what is all of this going to look like. And our job as CEOs to look forward and think about that in part of this wider context. So we've sort of talked about, I think Russell's talked about what we're good at and our sense of place, our sense of community, our sense of understanding, and the leadership that you will bring as mayors, which is, I think, the mana to mana thing, aspect of this conversation is that you are elected from our communities to represent. And the difficulty sometimes is you're representing issues which currently we have little traction to get further on around housing, homelessness, and they take so much work. I'm thinking about place-based housing, Mayor Stevie, in your example, or Hastings, and it seems to just take so much effort to get there. But actually, that's what our communities are asking us to help solve. So we've worked through those issues. We've worked through what could that look like, knowing that the COVID experience absolutely amplified and exemplified to central government that it was local government and iwi and our NGOs, our charitable trust largely, who delivered in COVID. And I think there's a real recognition at the centre about that, and a changed approach potentially could bring on that. So it's almost now is the hour to capitalise on that. And I'm glad to see Ezra nodding because he did sort of infer that to us. But I guess the last page should be in some ways be the first page, because as we talked about the what ifs and what might be's and could be's, is actually some really core and important principles that should inform any of the conversation or what we may think about for the future. And that is about, as Te Rangi said, giving mana or attributing mana and respect to all of leadership in the region. You as leaders around the table, as mayors, to iwi chairs, to senior ministers who represent the region, and kind of work with us in the region. The commitment to our respective commitment to the treaty and being good treaty partners. The participation of that nucleus of that diagram, local government, iwi, and government elected leaders to create a national network of service needs, identification, service design and delivery. And I guess in that is that nexus of saying we want to be in there co-designing, as Mayor Gary has said, what is best for our communities rather than inheriting things from the centre, but actually being at the leadership table and co-designing and then getting into local delivery and implementation. And an absolute commitment to focusing on advancing the four well-beings for all communities of our region. Appreciating and respecting the diversity of leadership perspectives, trusted relationships. So in fact, that was the first thing that we talked about that day, was the importance of trust and confidence really in all relationships, but growing that between the centre and the region at all levels. And then resourcing to make sure that we can facilitate the agreements into action. And we've all got challenges, whether they're the challenges of our time, COVID, recovering from Whakaari erupting, or whether it's going to be meeting the policy agenda change coming through in terms of waters, RMA reform, solid waste, whatever that looks like. So making sure that we are clear about the resourcing required. In our region, for example, it's about making sure we catalyse to the best opportunity of the investment from the Provincial Growth Fund. So all that work going into successfully funding the projects, now what do we need to do to ensure we make the most of that? And we need to make sure we're clear and coherent into the centre about what we need for our region collectively and within a sub-regional and a TLA level. So we thought actually those principles were really important sort of codifying principles about the way in which we work. And as I said, it's probably almost that was the first thing we talked about. They've ended up on the last page, but some good principles with which to continue to have this conversation in whatever shape or form you as mayors and chairs decide that needs to progress. But I, for one, found that conversation really worthwhile. And I depending on the speed, the result of the election may amplify the speed of the change agenda. We're not quite sure. Be interesting to see how that comes through between now and sort of Christmas. But being prepared for that and understanding what that is going to mean for us, I think collectively will be really important. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to come together as CEs and just have some time out of the day and the daily grind to think about these issues, because when you stack all of up what's in front of us, it's significant, and the centre is saying the most significant change for local government since '89. And so I think co-designing, being ready for that, is going to be really, really important.
Thanks, Steph. Fiona, do you want to wrap it up?
Yes, so what we were seeking was for you to receive this report today and to consider with your councils with a view of the Mayoral Forum coming together again potentially on the 9th of December, around 9th or 10th of December. There is an opportunity around that time frame for ministers to be in our region and to have a discussion with them, and also to potentially have the likes of Tawera Gardner, who's doing a lot of work for the Regional Council in terms of seeking to understand from iwi chairs how they want to work and how they want to work with the Regional Council, and coming together in terms of presenting to this incoming government. I would be very happy to work with the other CEOs to develop the BIM that Mayor Turner was talking about in terms of having something in writing for you to present. I think the discussion that we had at this workshop was very key in terms of ensuring that local government does its homework before these hui, so that you're very clear in terms of what you're seeking out of them as leaders of local government.
Thanks, Fiona. So that essentially puts the item on the table for discussion. So my commentary would be that as mayors and chair, when you're presented with a paper from the chief executives of our respective organisations, and I know, Russell, the comment that probably all the chief executives weren't there, but I would trust that the principles have been socialised with everybody. when they bring to the table a position reflecting the wider environment in which we operate in terms of the challenges, we shouldn't just kick it for touch. We should give it serious consideration, because these are the people who on a day-to-day basis run our businesses, and it is a business. It's not the corner dairy anymore. You all know some of the figures that you're faced with in terms of capital spend, OPEX, looking after your communities, and that's more direct as opposed to some of the other wellbeings. So I'd ask you to give this serious consideration. It's now up for discussion. Mayoral.
I was just hoping to hear from the other 4 executives who went there as to what their thoughts are on this, please.
Sorry, who was that? Oh, Mayor Chadwick?
Yeah, and all of you know that Jeff wasn't there. So when we're not there, we miss the discussion about shaping a paper. We'd probably like to look at the paper and do a bit of a reading, and before we put it to council. So that would involve the CEs, our CE going back to your cluster. Not slowing it down. Don't worry, Doug, I can see your pen wiggling. but some constructive approach around here. And I worry, I heard it about capability. So frankly, we're going through a restructure too, which is to reshape our organisation to fit our long-term plan. That is all-consuming at the moment, and that will reshape the way we're going to work as a council in the future. So that point, Lynn, was a good one, because I think all the CEs need to be together. I'd like to see them work on this before I put it to council. I'd like to see that input to come in, because we certainly had a very vigorous discussion around it. Only CE and Mayor and Deputy Mayor. So good on you for producing this. I think it needs that next look at about the relationship matrix, and then we'd be prepared to put something to our council that I feel we've been part of the shaping, and we just weren't there because we couldn't be there. So that capability to respond, Fiona, I hear your endeavours. The 9th is in our diary. I'm just very unsure about what we would say at a forum when we get whatever cluster coming. But I understand how we do show that we work together. But so I'd like the chief executives to look at this for a next cut before we put it to council. And we need that quickly returned. That reflects some of our individual concerns. And then just that question of capability.
Thanks, Steve. David, could I draw you in terms of your view?
Probably, I'll call on CEO Gareth. Were you there, Gareth?
No, unfortunately, I wasn't, David. I wasn't able to be there either. So, yeah, have had a look through the document. Look,
okay, I'll take Steve. Just ditto what Stevie said. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Gary.
Yeah, up to now in my life, I've not been known for my diplomacy, so now is not the time to change, I don't think. I could take a paper like this. In fact, I would not accept a paper like this from any executive, sorry. It may be okay as a start of a 10 if you're at about 0.1 on the scale. To me, the work needs to be done. I am not a centrist, neither am I a decentralist. I'm more in the space of doing what is right for what you're trying to do. And the future development strategy that every TLA has to do once every 3 years is fundamental, And that's where you don't do the localism. And that ain't ever going to happen at a regional level. Sorry, don't get your team, get over it. But when we're looking at climate change and sea level rise, that is not for every kilometre of the periphery between the sea and the land, specific to any one TLA. It will happen internationally. So sea level rise and climate change, to me, that is a national issue for central government to look at. I think there's some stuff in the middle around Three Waters and RMA reform where we could go to central government with a view on. But when you come to the iwi leaders, this really becomes incredibly nightmarish for me.
Yes.
Stevie's got an incredible relationship with Te Ara and Rotorua. Ours in the Western Bay is fraught with, right now, we're amongst friends, but our Te Arawa group are having difficulty even getting in the same room as the three Tauranga Moana group. I spent a fair bit of time recently with Minister Little when he was in this part of the world, saying we've got a little problem over at Kati where people are occupying some land and we don't know whether it's Hauraki or it's Tauranga Moana. So, we've got to let Māoridom sort that out, because the minute we step in as Pākehā or local government or whatever hat we're wearing, we are in the wrong space. So I think, well, I'd much rather, if this paper, where is the Rasky analysis and where is the matrix?
Yeah.
FDS done at the TLA level. Sea level change, climate change done at central government level. The regional land transport plan is done at the regional level. So we know, what can be done regionally needs to be done regionally. But I think when you get into the iwi leader space, we need to recognise their boundaries are totally different to ours. And working across them is incredibly difficult and fraught with danger. The one thing I haven't achieved in my 10 years in local government is getting to understand where the boundaries are. So in another 2 years, I'll give up. We just need to understand what we can do and what we can't do, and where does it sit on the matrix, and then go across, who's responsible, who's accountable, who's supporting, who's communicating, and who's informing. The standard Rasky analysis, we need to know that before we can sit across the table with anybody, whether that's iwi leaders or central government leaders. If we don't know that, we can't even begin the conversation. And if I don't see a paper with that level of detail, I'm not going to take it to my council. Sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Gary.
I guess, Grass, my response to the paper was that it was inviting us into a more detailed discussion. It wasn't a fait accompli that this is it. It was are we open to stuff? It's silly to do a huge amount of work and then get it rejected. It's actually better to say, look, we're thinking about this. What's your generalised feeling? Do we proceed or don't we? So I wasn't so worried about the lack of detail. I was more thinking that we were being asked in principle to say, do we want our staff and our CEs to be heading in that direction, where they talk more, they start to develop the detail for us, or are they wasting their time? So that's how I took it. I was less worried about the lack of detail.
Thanks, Judy. Here we go.
I'm more than happy to respond to that. I tried to implement in my time is if there is no resolution from the governance, the executive don't do any work. They get on with running the business. And so this I thought was, to me, and I go back to the first point, we have to have a conversation with central government first to work out where they're coming from, and then we start working down the tree. To me, this was a bottom-up approach and inappropriate given that, it was written before the election. And it was a bit of a lottery what was going to happen, but some of us got it sort of right. where we are at now, I think we need, the first point, we need to sit across the table with central government and say, where are they going? What are their priorities? And then how do we fit in with them? And this is a sort of further down the track for me. Yeah, I think we need to do it, but we really need to meet with central government first. You know, where are their priorities?
So, me, Gary, my answer to that is, we're smart, we read the tea leaves. And we talked about that earlier today.
I agree, and I think I've read the tea leaves. There's no money for roads. There is money going into housing, and there's money going into hospitals, and there's money going into schools. Hospitals and schools, we can be on the fringes of, and that comes out of our future development strategy. So have we got our future development strategies right so that central government knows where we think the schools should go, where the hospitals should go? Because I'll take this point, if they're going to build a school at Kaddy, but we're going to put all the development out the east, that's not a good investment. So we need to have that conversation with central government.
Well,
yeah, but I think that's in the detail.
Well, no, that's on the high level. Where are they spending money?
No, it's in the detail of where they're going to put a school. But essentially, local government and the TLAs are closer to than what the region is. And we're not trying to impose a regional council footprint over what territorial authorities do. But we do cover the whole region. But sitting as a requirement on all of us are the issues around the four well-beings, which is not about where you put the school, it's about the health and the wealth of your communities. How do we improve upon those things? And I think the executive essentially saying this is a key component of this bit of work. It's not talking about your horizontal infrastructure.
Can I add something?
Yes, Stevie.
Look, I would agree with Gary. If we're really strategic, so the high level principle is we'll work together where it benefits the wider region, wider region. Happy with that. I want to hear from the ministers first. I know, like you and all of the mayors here, you've all got a political lens where they're going. But I want to be much more specific to take something to them. And if I'm putting energy into a regional forum, I want it to be very targeted. And it's like a statement of intent. I want to know what it is we're going to be working on. We're not there yet. And I think it's the sequencing this is a start with the paper. I would never have signed it. That's what pressed my button. I just thought, no way. We haven't even populated this or discussed it. We only knew CEs were trying to get something together, and well done for you that did. So I think we need to hear from the cluster of ministers that are coming and then say by then we've all finished our LTP. So we know where our spatial plan, our district plan's going, we know our needs, we've done our demographic analysis, and then we can say, is there any value in a regional approach for this and this? I didn't have any problem, Fiona, with the propositions that you mentioned that we could work on, climate change and resilience and roading, but I think there may be more specificity that will shape up in the new year. So I wouldn't support this paper yet either.
Okay, thanks, Stevie. So, Lynn, do you want to make a comment before I pull it together? Or Tina, you might want to think about it.
I'm in accordance with Mayor Steve and Mayor Gary on this.
I guess my only comment is, I believe Marty, our CE, wasn't able to be at the workshop and so hasn't been able to provide feedback at this point. So I think we just need to go back and actually have some conversations.
Okay, thanks, Tina. Thanks, Lynn. So look, I hope I reflect the consensus that I hear around the table from the governance group. So thanks, Chief Executives, for doing this work. But clearly there is a view that until a collection of ministers or a minister is able to front the mayoral forum or a collective of the respective organisations in the Bay of Plenty and tell us or instruct us in terms of the way they want the region to operate. There's no appetite to continue to do any more work in terms of taking the initiative. Is that fair reflection, Mayor Gary? Your view?
Sorry, no, I actually think the point that I was trying to make is the matrix. You know, what are the issues? You know, and start off with the future development strategy, the regional land transport, iwi relations, climate change, you know, list all of those down and then go across and say, you know, who's responsible, and then work out where we should be collaborating and where we actually let the individuals get on with it or leave the central government. You know, like education and housing, we're advocates. But where are we going to advocate for? You know, so I think that matrix needs to be done so that we all know when we get together with the people, what are the areas we want to go, and then going back to the original conversation we had, where have we done well in the last 3 years in our part of the world, and that's the East, Rotorua and ourselves, to let the ministers know that we're still trying to do things, but I think that matrix with the responsibilities or who it falls to needs to be put together so that when we do get together, we do make sure we've covered off everything we need to. Because you're only going to get one shot at this.
I appreciate that. So I'm going to ask the chief executives in terms of, because the original proposal here was to have a session with the incoming ministers of some sort in December.
Yes, we're aware that there might be a relatively senior delegation around the time of the commemoration event for Whakaari in the region.
Okay, so is that an opportunity for us to get in front of the ministers or to hear the ministers? There's a difference between us getting in front of ministers and then meeting the timelines in terms of your LTP, which is February for consultation and adoption in June.
Yeah, but we know the issues, Gary, we know the issues by the end of our workshops.
Yeah, Judy?
I guess what I'm concerned is we had a group of CEs, not everybody could attend, and that seems to be part of the problem. Would it be good that we ask the CEs to have another follow-up on this so that with everybody there and they can cast their eye and their regional concerns over it in preparation for when we have a time with the minister? That to me seems an obvious solution, is we ask them to get together and make it a priority to be there, particularly the ones that haven't had a input into it, so that we kind of have got a bit of a collective understanding of what we would like to talk to the ministers about.
I absolutely agree, Judy. I second that notion.
Hey, Gary?
I think they're two separate issues. One is, and if there's people coming through Whakaari, as I said earlier on, try and, if we know these people, try and tackle it before or after that, so they're here anyhow. Telling them what we've done well over the last 3 years and what we would like to continue, or the relationship we'd like to continue, is one thing. The next stage is, and I think this is a separate thing, you know, 3 water reform. The changes to the RMA, I think we need to get our ducks lined up first on that.
Yeah.
And that's where I go through starting off with the FDS, which has to be done at the local level. That's where all this spatial stuff starts coming in as well. You know, what do your community want you to do in that 4 well-being space? And then, you know, where is the climate change? That just, to me, is a separate exercise, because I think the first meeting is to setting up a trend that, hey, these people are sensible, they know what they're doing. How do we get into a regular relationship with them going forward? So you might want to set up, but to me, the second bit that the chief executive is the subsequent conversations, because the RMA thing is not going to happen in 6 months. The 3 waters, you know, we've got some big decisions to make in 3 waters, and I think we've got a bit of work to go through ourselves before we start sitting down with ministers to say, this is what we think. Because I know right now that we're, between even the Waikato and the Bay of Plenty, we're in disparate groups.
Okay, but one of the things that does worry me, Gary, is that we have a regional leadership group, which is made up of our CEs, essentially, and local government officials. And I don't know what goes on there, but the issues you're discussing about what are we good at, where's the priorities, should be issues that they talk about there, rather than us try and reinvent the wheel here. But you want to make a comment, Fiona? Because, you know, if we don't have that alignment and that activity taking place at the regional leadership group, what the hell's the point of having it?
Yeah, so the regional leadership group is a construct from central government, and Ezra can talk about it more in terms of trying to bring central government, iwi and local government together. It is at the official level though, and it's actually in your language, it's more an advisory group to respective leaders. It's not a group of the mayors, iwi chairs and ministers. So it works together, and it's been very strong post-COVID because of the need for central government, iwi and local government to work together. Ezra, do you want to say anything?
No, it's sort of just really following up for Fiona. It's essentially that really. It sort of was born out of an opportunity to really from central government to ways to better connect with iwi and local government. And so I guess the opportunity is, I think to your point, Chair, is I think they're probably two separate things. I mean, that regional leadership group is still forming. It isn't fully inclusive of all of our iwi and local government. But I think the point you're trying to make, Mr. Chair, is the work that has to happen in the background in order to provide a level of assurance for our mayors here to take this opportunity forward.
Yeah, thanks, Ezra. Okay, so what about by way of outcome on this paper that we ask the CEs to collectively go and prepare briefing for incoming ministers, which aligns with your issue earlier, Judy. It doesn't address this fundamental issue of taking an approach in terms of the initiative around a regional grouping, and we'll see where they get to. And we can still keep on the frame for the next Mayoral Forum in December. Yes?
So take that on board, absolutely. I guess the question is, because time will move very quickly, if we do have a senior delegation come in early December, do we want to invite iwi chairs to sit alongside of it? As Tawera Gardner is leading that forum and they have come together, do we want to extend the invitation for at least part of that for iwi chairs to come and sit with you as mayors and chairs to be there in front of the centre when we have that first opportunity to demonstrate that partnership between iwi and local government? That's because that's going to lead to some work for us in the background, and I guess it would be good to have some direction from today.
My view is yes.
Doug, could I speak to that?
Yes, Stevie.
We can't be gratuitous about the partnership. The partnership at the moment, even at a local level, is shaky. It's no good asking Tā Toby when he is trying to develop an iwi voice for Te Arawa and falling apart. Don't just get him to an iwi leaders group because he's got no reference back. And I think it's very dangerous to say, therefore, we've got it right. We've got Sir Wira and Tā Toby. That's not good enough. That's the old way of working. So I think that's very dangerous. Can I say, just for example, and I'll be frank here, and Ezra knows it, at the meeting with the heads of government, it was agreed we'd have a COVID card trial in Rotorua. I knew nothing about it. Tā Toby knew nothing about it. And then suddenly we're all racing to meet what a government's objectives are to get a trial for a COVID card. We've got to be careful what we sign up to because that's caused an enormous amount of work because of an agreement at a regional table by someone who did not have the authority to agree on behalf of Te Arawa. And that's the danger of us thinking we've got them at the table, we've got a strategy, we can dial an iwi leader group. Be careful what we're saying here. If it really works and is enduring, it's much more meaningful than that. So I think that side of the equation is very shaky, and we've got to be careful. I think for Whakaari, yes, you'll know who to get there. But I just think we're disingenuous if we continue to pursue like this. One of the issues might be that we put forward a better democratic tool for iwi partnership and representation. Because you've got it right on regional council, but the rest of us may not. That's what I'm suggesting. So I don't want to bog it down, but I think keep that to one side, but don't think you've got that right with your regional iwi leaders group. It's certainly not. And I think you're doing it, you're trying to do it well, but be careful. Because ministers go away and go, oh, they're all right over there. They've got it all right. Well, we haven't, quite frankly. And I won't say that in a big forum, and I won't say that in a forum at home. But because we're trying to sort through the relationship in a genuine way to get the benefits. And that's what the region needs, the benefits, if you've got the right enduring relationship. So that's another issue that needs to be just parked while I think the CEs look at, hear from the ministers, CEs get this paper rejigged before we agree to, yeah, we're going to have a 6-month regional mayors forum. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Stevie. So can you reinforce your position? Because the question was, should we invite iwi representation, iwi chairs, and let's respect that in terms of who attends, that's for them to sort out.
Yes.
Are you in support of that, or did I get the impression you were saying, look, Ngāti Awa in terms of Whakaari is probably the appropriate one and it should be left to that?
That's my view with the regional iwi leaders.
Okay. Okay. Right. I'm going to put a resolution on the table that the recommendation in terms of this paper be left lie on the table, and that the CEs in terms of the last 3 agenda items be asked to prepare a BIM for the incoming ministers. And Steph, your call. It's your show in terms of commemoration of Whakaari, and I'll leave it up to you in terms of your scope, discussion with Ngāti Awa, who are the appropriate people. But in terms of iwi relationships, I don't think, Stevie, that across the Motu we're being disingenuous. The issue is, across a range of public policy regulatory reforms, there are some timelines. And the regional council is doing its utmost in terms of trying to collate representation from iwi/hapu across the region to meet those timelines. We cannot resolve the issue of who the appropriate persons or entities are that speak on behalf of iwi and or hapu. Only they can do that. But what I do know is that the clock is ticking. And at the regional council level, all we are doing is trying to facilitate that discussion so we have some line of sight on who we listen to in terms of iwi relationships. And I can share with you, because it's in the public domain, that in terms of, in particular, the freshwater reforms, David Parker put together, as Minister of the Environment, he put together a reference group called Kahui Wai Māori.
Yeah.
And that group has been the body that the regional sector in particular has been using to work with to get the partnership approach with iwi solidified so that as we go into the writing of the regulatory process, we've got agreement. Now, currently, despite 18 months or 2 years of working through that, I'm still not sure, and I'm not confident that iwi have sorted out who has the mandate to actually represent iwi in terms of the implementation
Right.
of issues such as Te Mana o Te Wai. Mayor Weber.
I'm quite happy to second I think of the first two sentences of your
Spiel.
motion, that we let it lie on the table, and for the reason that I think I made the point, let's not blur the Whakaari issue. There will be a meeting for that.
Yes, this is something separate.
Yeah, what we're talking about is something separate. If you try to lump it all into one agenda, we'll shoot ourselves in the foot pretty well, and we might do it with a bazooka rather than with a pop gun. To me, let it lie on the table, and I think that the executives have got to go further. You know, I think there's a bit of work they need to do, but I'd suggest, as you said, they need to be all in the room, because with all due respect, 3 out of 8 is not a significant majority when I went to school. So they need to be all around the table so that we do get a consensus back from the majority.
So what are you seconding, Mr. Mayor?
Well, you said that lie on the table.
Yes.
Yes.
And then I also said that the executive team be asked to go away and prepare a BIM from becoming ministers.
Yes.
Happy with that? And the issue about the celebrations in Whakatane is separate, but let's acknowledge that at that time they're trying to do that, we're trying to organise a Mayoral forum.
Yes.
But we'll try and get the ministers after or before to a separate meeting.
Christine.
So I'm just picking up in terms of that request for the chief executives. I think I would, from a TCC point of view, support the issues that Mayor Weber raised. I think it's important to be really clear around whether issues are local, sub-regional or regional, and whether those issues are issues that we have in common at a local level that we want to raise with the ministers, or whether they are regional issues that we're looking to engage regionally on as a collective group. I think they're quite different things. And we also need to be really clear, are we seeking to provide information or are we seeking to move into action? So I think those, because some of it is just a lack of clarity, and I think thinking about taking these matters back to our council and asking for support, talking about climate change is very broad, whereas we're really clear about actually what's happening at a local level on climate change, where are the issues of common, perhaps coastal areas in the bay, and how we might work together. What are the other climate change issues that are regional that we might want to engage with central government? And I think that will help to be able to have a conversation with our elected members to get them to a position where they'll be comfortable supporting it. I think at the moment it's a little bit too general, and there's a bit of concern that it's actually moving into the space of the mandate of each of the local councils. And if we can be clearer around that, then it'll be clear what the value proposition of working together is. It's just a suggestion on some of the thinking that might be useful to come through the CEO paper.
Can I just seek some clarification? Your comments pertain to the document that we've been discussing, or do they pertain to the work that needs to be done in terms of the BIM?
The work that needs to be done in terms of the BIM, and the work that needs to be done to enable us to speak to our councils to get a level of support for working together that it's clearer what the value proposition is, because I don't think that's strong enough currently in what's come through in this paper. So it's really about the next step.
Okay, so I appreciate those comments, but I think in terms of briefing to ministers, brevity is the order of the day. These people do not have time to read a novel. And clearly some of you chief executives have been down this pathway before. I think you need to know what to prepare, and I'll just leave it at that. But if I was in the position of the minister, I'd want something that was short, concise, to the point. What are the issues? The detail you can work out at a later time. Anyway, so and thanks Christine. So then, I've moved this issue lie on the table, and that chief executives be asked to prepare a BIM for incoming ministers. Gary seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Gary. Right, thank you. Is there anything else anyone wants to put on the table for discussion? What about our colleagues on Zoom?
No, I'm fine, thank you, and thank you for tolerating me being on Zoom.
That's all right. Thanks, Stevie. David, you fine? Okay, thank you. Oh, well, everybody, that just leaves me to bring the meeting to a close. So thanks very much for your attendance. I think some of the issues that are in front of us in terms of those last 3 agenda items that we've been speaking to are really important. And I'll close the meeting, and please stay. We've got some light refreshments. And thank you to those people on Zoom. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Ka kite.
Ka kite.